December 15, 2024. Buckeye, Arizona. A tranquil Sunday afternoon in a quiet neighborhood near 254th Drive and Maricopa Road. Inside a modest home, 3 generations of women, 71-year-old Deborah Green Davis, her daughter, and her granddaughter, 31-year-old Larkia Elliott, are present. At approximately 4:10 p.m., a call is placed to 911. The dispatcher hears distress in the background. Moments later, the line goes silent. When officers arrive, they find Elliott unresponsive, suffering from a gunshot wound to the back. Despite life-saving efforts, she is pronounced dead at the scene. Green Davis is taken into custody without incident. She admits to knowingly and intentionally shooting her granddaughter after being assaulted. What led to this tragic culmination of familial conflict? How did a grandmother come to shoot her granddaughter while her own daughter looked on? This is the story of a family torn apart by violence, a community left in shock, and the questions that remain unanswered. This is Grandmother Shoots 31-year-old Granddaughter While Mother Looks On. This is the case of 71-year-old Deborah Green Davis and her granddaughter, 31-year-old Larkia Elliott, a story that began like so many others, a multi-generational family living under one roof, trying to make it work. But beneath the surface of everyday life were years of strain, unspoken resentment, and emotional wounds that never fully healed. On the afternoon of December 15, 2024, in a quiet Buckeye, Arizona neighborhood, a sudden act of violence shattered the fragile peace of that household. In one tragic moment, a grandmother raised a gun, and fired it, into the back of her granddaughter. Standing only feet away, Green Davis's own daughter watched as one life ended and another was irreversibly changed. The call to 911 came in just after 4 p.m. The operator could hear the panic, the screaming, and then, silence. Officers arrived at a one-story suburban home, where they found Elliott unresponsive on the bedroom floor, a single gunshot wound in her upper back. Despite attempts to revive her, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The alleged shooter? Her grandmother. A woman old enough to be anyone's matriarch. Quiet. Reserved. And, on that day, armed. Police took Green Davis into custody without resistance. She admitted, in her own words, to shooting her granddaughter intentionally after a struggle. She claimed self-defense, telling detectives that Elliott had hit her and tried to take her phone. But the truth, as always, may be far more complicated. Because this wasn't just a spontaneous outburst or a one-time argument that went too far. This was the result of years of friction, personal, emotional, perhaps even psychological. A house filled with unresolved conflict, generational pain, and, as it would turn out, a loaded weapon. It's a crime that forces us to ask the hardest questions. How does love become anger? How does fear become action? And how does a grandmother come to kill her granddaughter, with her daughter as a witness? As investigators began to piece together the moments that led up to the shooting, they uncovered layers of family tension that had gone unaddressed for years. There were no signs of forced entry, no outsider to blame. The threat, the fear, the violence, it all came from within. And so we ask. Was this truly a case of self-defense? Or was it something more tragic, something that had been building for years, hidden behind family photos and polite conversations? Was this a one-second decision made in fear, or the result of decades of dysfunction? This is the story of what really happened inside that Buckeye home. When a family's deepest fractures finally broke open, leaving one woman dead, and another in handcuffs. In many ways, the Green Davis family appeared to be like any other in the growing suburban sprawl of Buckeye, Arizona. A grandmother, her daughter, and her granddaughter, all 3 women living under one roof. 3 generations bound not only by blood but by shared burdens, quiet compromises, and the slow erosion of peace that comes with unspoken tension. Deborah Green Davis, 71 years old at the time of the shooting, was, by all outward appearances, a calm and steady figure. A retired woman with gray hair and tired eyes, she had once been described as the matriarch of her family. Friends and neighbors knew her as quiet, polite. The kind of woman who waved from the porch but didn't linger to talk. She had lived through her share of life's challenges, raising children, losing loved ones, and weathering financial hardship. But she held on to a sense of order. She had expectations about how people should behave. About how her family should function. And when that order was disrupted, it deeply unsettled her. Living with her was her daughter, whose name hasn't been widely released in public documents, perhaps by choice, or perhaps out of protection. She was in her early 50s and had her own complicated relationship with both her mother and her daughter. According to one law enforcement official, she was in the room when it happened, but didn't speak out until after the gun had fired. She has since been described by media reports as the silent witness. Then there was Larkia Elliott, 31 years old, the youngest of the three. A woman whose life had taken difficult turns. Some said she had trouble holding jobs. Others said she was misunderstood, passionate, intense, and often frustrated. She had worked briefly as a correctional officer at Lewis State Prison between October 2019 and August 2020. It was a difficult position. The kind that required discipline, patience, and a high tolerance for stress. She left the role after less than a year, and those close to her say that job took a toll on her. Larkia reportedly had a temper, but also had a history of feeling dismissed, ignored even, within her own family. She struggled with boundaries, and sources close to the case would later say that emotional flare-ups between her and her grandmother had become increasingly common in the months leading up to the shooting. But this wasn't just a story of clashing personalities. It was a story of three women carrying their own silent battles. Living under one roof not because they wanted to, but because, for financial or personal reasons, they had to. And in that confined space, every disagreement lingered. Every unresolved argument echoed louder than the last. As one neighbor reportedly told local reporters, they kept to themselves. You'd never expect anything like this from them. But looking back, something always felt tense. You could feel it. Behind closed doors, the home had become something more than shelter. It was a pressure cooker. And the pressure was building. To understand how shocking this case was, you have to understand where it happened. Buckeye, Arizona is a city in transition. Located roughly 35 miles west of Phoenix, it was once a quiet farming town with miles of desert roads and open land. But in the past 2 decades, Buckeye has transformed. It's now one of the fastest-growing cities in the United States, drawing new residents with promises of affordable housing and family-friendly communities. New subdivisions have cropped up almost overnight. Streets that were once lined with fields are now home to cul-de-sacs, parks, and middle-class families. Schools have been built to accommodate the influx. Strip malls, grocery stores, and chain restaurants dot the landscape. Buckeye has become a symbol of modern suburban America. A place where people move to start over or to slow down. Violence like this doesn't happen here often. Not like this. When news broke that a 71-year-old woman had shot her 31-year-old granddaughter inside their home, while her daughter looked on, residents were stunned. This wasn't a gang-related incident. It wasn't a robbery or a home invasion. There was no stranger in the house that day. Everything that unfolded did so inside a quiet, residential neighborhood. The kind where kids ride bikes and people bring in the trash cans for their neighbors. The kind of place where tragedies usually happen somewhere else. But on that day, tragedy happened right here. In the following segments, we'll walk through the events that unfolded in the hours and minutes before the shooting. We'll explore what the 911 call revealed. We'll examine what was said, and what wasn't, by those inside the house. Because while a single shot was fired, the echoes of that violence reach far beyond the walls of that home. On the surface, it was just another December day. The Arizona sun filtered through half-closed blinds. The quiet street of 254th Drive in Buckeye stirred gently, like any other Sunday. But behind those beige stucco walls, something else was unraveling. This wasn't just the story of a single argument gone wrong. It was the slow accumulation of stress, resentment, and silence, a weight that grew heavier with each passing day. The Green Davis household was, by all accounts, under strain. Deborah Green Davis had lived a full life, retired now, with age softening her steps but not her resolve. She was a woman used to structure, to respect. But her home had grown loud, unpredictable. She had been living with her daughter and her granddaughter, Larkia Elliott, for months, if not years. Tensions didn't start overnight. Friends and neighbors didn't report frequent shouting or police cars parked outside. But sometimes, dysfunction is quiet. Sometimes, it lives in passive glances. In closed bedroom doors. In meals eaten apart, in silence. Larkia, the 31-year-old granddaughter, had returned to the home after a period of instability. She had worked briefly as a corrections officer at the Lewis State Prison from 2019 to 2020, but she left that position after less than a year. According to people familiar with her, the job had changed her. She carried that experience with her, quietly, but heavily. After leaving corrections, Larkia seemed to drift. She struggled to find her footing. Some relatives described her as having a temper, others said she felt dismissed in the home. One friend said she felt like she was constantly walking on a tightrope. There were rumors, never confirmed, of past mental health struggles. Perhaps depression. Possibly more. But nothing officially diagnosed. Nothing treated. She was the kind of person whose pain lived just under the surface. Visible only if you knew where to look. And Deborah? She noticed. She felt it. The outbursts. The mood swings. The volume. And slowly, she began to feel unsafe in her own home. We don't know exactly how many times arguments broke out. Police records show no prior 911 calls from the address in the months leading up to the shooting. But court documents reveal something telling. According to Deborah's own statement, the arguments had become more intense over time. On December 15, she overheard her daughter and Larkia in a loud verbal fight. It wasn't the first time. That day, something tipped. Deborah claimed she feared for her safety. In the middle of the argument, she tried to call 911. She would later tell police that it wasn't the first time she considered it. But before she could speak to a dispatcher, Larkia reportedly entered the room and physically attacked her, hitting her in the head and shoulder. Deborah's daughter, trying to de-escalate, pulled Larkia away by the hair. The scuffle moved from the hallway toward the kitchen. Court records later confirmed that Deborah walked to her bedroom and retrieved a handgun. What thoughts went through her mind in that moment? Was it self-defense, or premeditated fear? Was she afraid? Angry? Exhausted? Deborah walked back toward the commotion, gun in hand. The argument still unfolding. The energy still volatile. Her daughter now trying to mediate between her mother and her child. And then, just one shot. Fired into Larkia's back. The bullet tore through her spine. There were no second shots. No warning. Just one deafening crack that echoed through the home, and the neighborhood. Moments later, a new 911 call was placed. This time, it went through. The voice on the other end, shaken but calm, told dispatchers what had happened. That a woman had been shot in the home. That it was her own granddaughter. That it was her. Paramedics arrived to find Larkia unresponsive. They worked quickly, performing life-saving measures on the living room floor. But it was too late. She was pronounced dead on the scene. Deborah did not run. She did not hide the weapon. She handed it over to police without resistance and admitted to the shooting. During the interview, she repeated that she feared for her life. That she had been struck. That she was trying to protect herself. The police didn't see it that way. She was arrested on the spot. Later booked on a charge of second-degree murder. In a separate room, 71-year-old Deborah Green-Davis awaited the officers. Calmly, she handed over the handgun and recounted the events. She admitted to shooting her granddaughter, claiming it was an act of self-defense after being physically assaulted. But questions lingered. Was it fear that drove her to pull the trigger? Or was it the culmination of years of unresolved tension and familial strife? Neighbors expressed disbelief. A 70-year-old grandmother shooting and killing her granddaughter. That doesn't happen in this neighborhood, one remarked. Deborah was taken into custody and booked on a charge of second-degree murder. A judge set her bond at $500,000. As the community grappled with the tragedy, the lines between victim and perpetrator blurred. A family torn apart, a life lost, and a matriarch facing the weight of her actions. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She told them everything. But was it the truth? Let's pause, and retrace the path that brought us here. This is not just the story of a shooting. It's the unraveling of a family, thread by thread, argument by argument, over years. Deborah Green-Davis was not a stranger to hardship. A widow, a mother, a grandmother. A woman who once held her family together, who was described by some as calm and private. To neighbors, she was polite. Reserved. The type who waved but didn't chat much. Inside that Buckeye home, however, the dynamics told a different story. Larkia Elliott, 31 years old. A woman caught in a struggle, whether internal, external, or both. Friends called her complicated. Her criminal history, minor offenses, mental health concerns, wasn't hidden, but neither was her charm. She could be warm, charismatic, and then suddenly distant, even volatile. Police had responded to the home before. Arguments. Screaming. Domestic disturbances. None that led to serious charges. But all of them, in hindsight, pointed to a household under strain. And then there was the middle woman, Larkia's mother. The quiet witness. Sandwiched between generations. Perhaps the peacemaker. Perhaps the one who saw it all coming and could do nothing to stop it. December 15th began like any other day. But beneath the routines, coffee, TV, phone calls, an old wound was starting to reopen. We know from reports that an argument broke out. Loud enough for Deborah to pick up the phone and call 911. But then, something changed. According to Deborah, Larkia became violent. Deborah's call to police was interrupted. The recording captured only a portion before it cut off. Minutes later, Deborah would fire a single round, hitting her granddaughter in the back. Larkia was declared dead at the scene. Police say Deborah was composed. Cooperative. She turned over her weapon and explained what happened. She didn't flee. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She said she feared for her life and acted to defend herself. And now, we find ourselves at the crossroads of truth and perspective. Was this a last resort act of survival by a woman pushed past her limits? Or was it something else? A power play? A moment of irreversible anger? Or simply a tragedy, one rooted in a family's long history of silence, avoidance, and pain? Is this a textbook case of domestic violence gone too far, or a criminal act hiding behind a legal shield? And here's a question for you: what would you have done in Deborah's shoes? Would you have pulled the trigger? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Because the story is far from over. When the officers arrived on that quiet December evening, they were met with silence. No screams. No panicked relatives rushing to the door. Just Deborah Green-Davis, standing in the front room of her Buckeye home, calm, cooperative, and waiting. In her hands, she no longer held the weapon. It was on the table. Beside her, her daughter, the mother of the woman who lay lifeless on the floor, stood in a kind of stunned stillness. And on the carpet, in the family living room, 31-year-old Larkia Elliott, Deborah's granddaughter, was already gone. Paramedics declared her dead at the scene. One gunshot wound to the back. The crime scene unit began to process the house immediately. Yellow tape was rolled out around the front yard. Neighbors peeked from windows, but few approached. It was quiet. Eerily quiet. Inside the house, detectives began to piece together what had happened. And the story that emerged was complicated. Deborah didn't resist. She didn't lawyer up. She told them her version of events right away. She said her granddaughter had become violent. That Larkia had struck her and was in the middle of attacking her own mother when Deborah grabbed her firearm from a nearby room and fired. She claimed she didn't aim to kill, but to protect. She said she feared for her life. And yet, the evidence began to paint a different picture. The angle of the shot. The placement of the entry wound, squarely in the back. That single detail cast a long shadow over Deborah's account. Police reviewed the 911 call placed by Deborah shortly before the shooting. In the recording, abrupt, choppy, and ending mid-sentence, she can be heard saying there was a disturbance. But then it cuts off. The dispatch operator calls back. No answer. Forensics examined the handgun. A legally owned firearm, registered to Deborah. There was no sign of a struggle around the weapon. No signs of it being wrestled away or fought over. There were bruises on Deborah, but they were light. No fresh lacerations. No clear indication that her life was imminently threatened. Most damning of all was Deborah's own admission. When asked by detectives whether she believed her granddaughter was about to kill her daughter, the one she claimed to be defending, Deborah said no. That one sentence changed everything. From that moment on, what might have been considered a tragic accident or even a justified act of self-defense began to look like something else. A choice. The next morning, the Buckeye Police Department made their recommendation to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. Not manslaughter. Second-degree murder. A charge reserved for acts that are not premeditated, but are still carried out with intent. Prosecutors argued that Deborah had time. Time to retreat. Time to reconsider. Time to de-escalate. Instead, they said, she armed herself, and fired a fatal shot into the back of her granddaughter, who, based on trajectory evidence, was turned away. A Maricopa County judge reviewed the case and set Deborah Green Davis's bond at $500,000. It was a striking signal. The court did not see this as a clear-cut case of self-defense. They saw it as an act deserving of significant scrutiny. In the media, headlines began to spread quickly. Grandmother shoots granddaughter in Arizona domestic dispute. Family tragedy in Buckeye, generational rift turns fatal. Self-defense or murder? 71-year-old woman behind bars after deadly confrontation. The community of Buckeye was rattled. How could a matriarch, at 71 years old, end up in jail for murder? But as the investigation unfolded, it was clear, prosecutors weren't just putting Deborah Green Davis on trial. They were putting the family's silence, their history, their secrets, and their fractures, on trial, too. The case now headed to the courts. But in many ways, the verdict was already being debated. Not just in legal filings, but in public opinion. Was Deborah a desperate woman defending her home? Or had something inside her snapped, long before she ever pulled the trigger? The shooting of 31-year-old Larkia Elliott by her grandmother, 71-year-old Deborah Green Davis, sent shockwaves through the Buckeye community. Residents expressed disbelief that such a tragedy could occur in their neighborhood. One neighbor remarked, "A 70-year-old grandmother shooting and killing her granddaughter. I mean, that doesn't happen in this neighborhood. Come on." Local media outlets quickly picked up the story, with headlines highlighting the familial nature of the incident and the charges filed against Green Davis. The narrative of a domestic dispute escalating to fatal violence captured public attention. Online, discussions emerged debating whether the shooting was an act of self-defense or a criminal act. Some social media users expressed sympathy for Green Davis, suggesting that the charges were too severe if she acted out of fear. Others emphasized the fact that Elliot was shot in the back, questioning the justification for lethal force. Within the family, divisions became apparent. Some relatives viewed Larkia as a victim of generational trauma and unresolved conflicts, while others believed she had exhibited aggressive behavior that contributed to the tragic outcome. Even in death, Larkia became a symbol of pain, of misunderstanding, of generational collapse. As the legal proceedings loom, the community of Buckeye braces for a trial that promises to be as emotionally charged as it is complex. Deborah Green Davis, the 71-year-old grandmother accused of fatally shooting her granddaughter, Larkia Elliott, faces a second-degree murder charge. The prosecution is expected to argue that the shooting was not an act of self-defense but a deliberate choice. They point to Green Davis's own admission that she did not believe her granddaughter was attempting to kill her mother during the altercation. The fact that Elliot was shot in the back further complicates the self-defense claim. The defense, on the other hand, may present a narrative of a woman pushed to her limits, acting in a moment of fear to protect her family. They might highlight Green Davis's lack of a criminal record, her cooperation with law enforcement, and the chaotic nature of the incident. Emotional testimonies are anticipated from family members, neighbors, and possibly first responders. These accounts will likely delve into the family's history, the dynamics between the three generations of women, and the events leading up to that fateful day. And just when you think it's over, one detail comes out that changes how you see everything. During the investigation, it was revealed that Larkia Elliott had previously worked as a correctional officer at Lewis State Prison from October 2019 to August 2020. This detail adds another layer to her complex character, a woman who once held a position of authority, now remembered as a victim in a tragic family dispute. As the trial approaches, the community remains divided. Was this a case of a grandmother protecting her family, or a tragic overreaction that ended a young woman's life? The courtroom will soon become the stage where these questions are addressed, and the truth, however painful, will be sought. As of the latest reports, 71-year-old Deborah Green Davis remains in custody, charged with second-degree murder in the shooting death of her 31-year-old granddaughter, Larkia Elliott. The incident occurred in their Buckeye home, where a domestic dispute escalated tragically. The mother, caught between two generations, has remained silent publicly, her grief and trauma unfolding away from the public eye. One life lost. One behind bars. One left to carry the trauma forever. This case has left the Buckeye community grappling with difficult questions. Could this have been prevented? Was there a pattern no one saw? As the legal process continues, the community reflects on the complexities of familial relationships and the devastating consequences when conflicts escalate beyond control. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's a story about what happens when communication fails, and love turns to fear. A story that reminds us how fragile family bonds can be, and how decades of tension, silence, and unspoken pain can collapse in a single, irreversible moment. One trigger pull. 3 generations shattered. And a quiet Arizona neighborhood left searching for answers. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think this was justified? Should Deborah Green Davis have been charged with murder? Or was this the act of a desperate grandmother protecting the only family she had left? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters. And if you found this case compelling, if these are the stories that make you stop and think, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We bring you real stories, with real consequences, every day. Until next time, stay curious. Stay compassionate. And stay safe.